as a token American, Toya, I'm going to ask you a few questions, if that's okay. So, we had a debate on Thursday. What did you say about that?
I mean, it's interesting that it's so close to the election. This is supposedly going to be the last debate. Last time Trump said he wasn't going to do a debate. So they did these like competing town halls, which it's like, you might as well just have a debate at that point. But it was really interesting to see how different it was in the way that they performed. There was rules set in place about muting the microphones, even though they didn't really actually need to do that. And they kind of talked over each other. But a couple of things stood out to me. I mean, one was the discussion around the pandemic. And, Trump was asked how he will deal with the pandemic in the coming period. And he basically backpedaled to say he did everything that he could have done. And Europe is numbers are going up in Europe as well. And, all of these things, he didn't really talk about what was needed going forward. And Biden kind of attacked him on, you had said that it would be over by Easter. You had said that it would be over by the summer. But Biden also talked about the fact that in red states, numbers are going up. And I mean, I just have to say, I live in a blue state and my city is, a Democratic mayor. And the person who asked the questions, she even commented on my city because now we're in Boston, we're closing down public schools. So it was disingenuous for Biden to say that, well, because in red states, this, trying to point the blame on the Democratic Party, when actually, the Republican Party, excuse me, when actually the Democratic Party, is doing the same things. Boston and Massachusetts is a blue state, and we have to close down schools again. So I think it just, it really pointed to there not being a solution. Then they talked about, not then, but also they talked about healthcare. Yara, I mean, I know it's hard for you because you don't live in a place where we have to pay for healthcare, right? And I know in Europe, you're constantly under attack. I mean, in England, constantly under attack for your nationalized healthcare. But to listen to these men talk about their solutions that they're putting forward, Trump says on the one hand, 100 million Americans love their private insurance. I have private insurance. My private insurance is good. I pay $13 an hour for my private insurance. $13 an hour. Imagine what I could buy with that. I would much prefer socialized healthcare, And what's Biden's solution? Biden's solution is to have this hybrid where you have a public option for people who qualify, but also allow people to keep their private healthcare. It's just, they're talking in circles, from this up on their high horse. Like, it's just working people don't have all of these options that they're putting forward. So yeah, it just really points towards we need an alternative outside of the Democrats, outside of the Republicans, because it's just like this talking circle that they both go in.
I mean, obviously, when you're a billionaire, $13 an hour doesn't sound that much. But like, it always struck me in those discussions because it seems so, like detached from the reality that we have in Europe and even in Israel, where I'm from, when the system isn't completely socialized but semi-socialized, and but like the statement that people love the private health insurance, like, yeah, they do, because it's much better than not having any of it. But that's not the question, right? And I also love the numbers in Europe are rising as well. Like, oh, so like, are we gonna like look at other countries and see which one did the worst? Can't we just like find a solution and an alternative that would not kill millions of people worldwide? Like, I think that should probably be something that we push for. And like you said, it's not like we have an alternative. It's not like Biden gave maybe slightly better answers, but not a real alternative. But he's still up in the polls. So do we think it's kind of like in the bag, deal, Biden's winning, we can all breathe comfortably, we're not going to see Trump and start like preparing for a Biden presidency, which we'll still need to fight against, but in a different way, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that we can definitively say that because Biden is up in the polls that he's going to win. Another poll that I thought was interesting was they're saying that less people than expected who are registered Republicans are going to vote in person. Like, the number of registered Republicans that are mailing in their ballot is actually higher than previously thought. So I think on election night, it's still going to be up in the air to see how many people have mailed in their ballots. I mean, the number of people that are mailing in their ballots is like millions times more than ever before. But of course, we're still seeing, all of the voter suppression, and many of these mail-in ballots aren't going to be valid because of all of these different precedents that are being set in different states. For example, in one state, they're saying that if a person didn't get their, their ballot, like, someone watched them sign their ballot, then it's not going to be valid. Like all of these different little things. And so I think it's still going to be up in the air who's gonna win on election night.
So you think that even if, Biden gets the majority of the votes, Trump is still going to try and steal this election?
I mean, well, first we have to consider it's not necessarily just the majority of the votes, right? In the US, we have this weird electoral college. So it's the majority of the votes in the certain states that are, the battleground states that we call them. Trump has backpedaled a little bit on the question of stealing the election. He said some offhand comment about him maybe needing to leave the country. And I think him, getting sick kind of weakened him a little bit. And he's not being as upfront about that. We could see a situation maybe where he relies on the far right to kind of fight that battle for him, like in the streets, where he just claims fraud, but doesn't necessarily take the steps to steal the election. We saw in many states in the South, voters who are registered as Democrats received this email, and they're saying that it was not sent by this group. It was international influence, but regardless. Many registered voters received this email from this group called the Proud Boys, which is a far right group, saying that, basically threatening them if they don't go and vote for Trump. So yeah, there's this like right wing that's being whipped up, and maybe Trump might, he might rely on them, but I really think it's still all up in the air.
So, I mean, I think the question of the far right is really on everyone's minds right now, like not just in the US, generally around the world. But I was wondering, what do you think we should do? Like, what does Socialist Alternative do? What are the plans? What happens if Trump tries to steal the election? What happens if he wins? And also, what happens if Biden wins? Do we just like stop and kind of recalibrate, or are we planning to go on the streets anyway?
Yeah, so Socialist Alternative, we're planning for what Trump said. Trump said that he's going to steal the election. And so we're planning actions to say that we have to defend democracy. People should be able to vote, and the person that we vote for should be elected. Although we also think that we should have more options, better options. But regardless, we can't allow for someone to come in and steal the election. But if Biden wins on election night, that doesn't mean we shouldn't be hitting the streets, because what is the Democratic Party the best at? It's quieting the social movements. We call it the graveyard of social movements. They co-opt, and there is going to be, if Biden wins, this huge sigh of relief from the working class that we don't have to deal with Trump anymore. But what we're going to say on election night, if Biden wins, is what do we need to do to keep building movements, to keep the socialist movement going, to fight for the things that we need, whether that be, healthcare, education, housing, economic relief in the pandemic. What do we need to do to hold Biden accountable? There's still going to be so many unanswered questions as to if the Democrats are going to be able to get us out of this crisis. And so we want to build a movement to basically, start that process of holding those Democrats accountable.